Hello, and welcome to Sci-Fi Author Chat. Today, I have science fiction author and scientist, Callie Wallace, author of Dead Space and Salvation Day. Welcome, Callie.
Thank you. Thank you, Diane.
Great to have you.
Excited to talk to you.
Yeah. So I know Callie from book events in San Diego, where we shared a city for a little while, and now Callie has moved to the wonderful city of Portland, Oregon.
Yes, that's where I am now.
Great. So, Callie Wallace, you've been writing fiction your entire life, but you also pursued science, and having discovered that, according to your bio, geology was the one field where you could get course credit for hiking and camping.
Yes.
I mean, that's like a natural thing.
We have a visitor.
Hello. Okay, so we have to know who that is. Who's that?
This is Link. As soon as I started talking, he knew there was something going on, so he jumped on the desk. Yeah.
I'm always like, please bring in the pets. You know,
yes.
I'm living vicariously, you know.
Yeah.
So you earned a PhD in geophysics doing research on Himalayan mountain building and Indian earthquakes. It's incredible.
Yes.
Which, of course, that area is a very interesting area for the mental properties, right? Underneath.
Yeah, it's excuse me, now I'm going to move him because he's getting in the way. Yeah, no, it's an interesting place because, I mean, you look at the surface of the earth, you have continents, you have oceans, and, you know, the basic grade school conception is, you know, the continents move around, plate tectonics, they crash into each other. But for the most part, you don't have places where a continent on our active earth now, a continent is crashing into another one, except for where the Indian subcontinent is crashing into Eurasia. And so it's this great like example of a process that, you know, it's the biggest mountain range in the world, the highest elevations, whole bunch of really interesting, you know, characteristics. And so that's why the research like was focused there. So that's
fabulous.
Part of, you know, it's something, it was a place that when I was looking for, you know, I knew I wanted to study like mountain building and tectonics and that sort of stuff when I was looking for graduate schools. And, you know, when you look for science graduate schools, you base it entirely on what you want to research. That's, you know, you find people who are doing cool research and that's where you apply. And it, so I focused on that, and that's, you know, was lucky enough to be able to get to travel to India and China a few times and, you know, see some parts of the world that probably wouldn't have gotten a chance to see otherwise.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, I hope you write about that someday, that whole experience, if you haven't.
Yeah, no, I've thought about it. It's really, I feel like it's not the easiest thing in the world to write about, just because you don't want to, like, I don't want it to sound like, you know, like a white lady travel log, you know, but talking about the research is one thing, and talking about just the bizarre experience of being a graduate student thrown into this situation. I've thought about it, haven't quite done it yet. Although I will say that, you know, that experience of traveling to all these different places, made me love traveling to any place. And I feel like loving traveling just feeds story ideas constantly.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely.
And I know that's a very, like a lot of people don't have the resources or the ability or the time to go do it. So it's not a necessity, but it is something that for me, it's just like always wanting more. Like every place has its own millions of stories.
No, absolutely. And speaking of stories, so after you attended the Clarion Writers Workshop at the University of California, San Diego in 2010, you started devoting yourself in earnest to writing. And your short fiction has appeared in a number of science fiction and fantasy magazines, including Clark's World, F&SF, Asimov's, Lightspeed, and Tor.com. Congrats. And since then, you have been a novel writing machine. You released Shallow Graves, The Memory.
Yes. Here, I have some visual aids.
Yes.
Shallow Graves was the first one.
Great. So if you want to talk about each one, you can, and we can. I can
do just a brief little thing. Shallow Graves, my first book. It's a young adult horror novel. It's about a 16-year-old girl who was murdered and comes back to life as a monster, and has many interesting adventures after that.
Sounds like.
And then the second one is The Memory Trees,
Beautiful.
which is a young adult sort of like, we never knew how to categorize it. This is
The
it's a little bit
metadata.
like, yeah, it's like a little it's sort of like a contemporary, little bit fantasy-ish sort of family saga about sisters and mothers and daughters.
Wow.
Takes place on an apple orchard in Vermont.
Very
And
cool.
it's got a lot of descriptions of trees, which is a lot of my writing.
Well, I mean, you're in the right city for that, aren't you?
Yeah, right. Now it's going to get even worse.
Awesome. I love it.
My third book, City of Islands.
Oh, beautiful cover.
Oh, I love this cover. I absolutely adore it. I think it's gorgeous. The artist, she did such an amazing job just capturing like the mood. And that is a middle grade fantasy. Middle grade meaning 8 to 12-year-olds ish. This is probably slightly on the high side, but there's nothing objectionable in it, And it's about a girl who lives in a archipelago city where there's magic and there's monsters under the sea and there's pirates and there's like, all kinds of, it's a fantasy adventure, and it was all the fun that entails, and super fun to write.
Oh,
and yeah. And then we switch genres again. This is what
right. Now it gets serious.
Theme. Yeah. This is then my fourth book, Salvation Day.
Salvation Day. Yes. We were
talking
about that. So
yes, this is an adult science fiction thriller / I guess there's some horror elements in there. Mostly it's, I think thriller is probably the most accurate, how you describe things, whatever. And it's about a group of people who are essentially a terrorist cult who kidnap some people to take over an abandoned spaceship.
Whoa.
That was the site of a terrible tragedy some years ago, and they find out that what they thought they knew about it was wrong, and then very bad things happen for 200 pages.
Whoa. That sounds pretty exciting.
Yeah, it is. I hope it is. I think it's pretty exciting. It's very fast paced, lots of, action in
Love it.
Zero gravity, all that kind of stuff. A lot of fun to write. And then the most recent one, which came out in March, just a few months ago, is Dead Space.
Dead Space. Now this one, I feel like this one is just going to creep me out, and I can't wait.
It's, I hope so. But it is another sort of sci-fi thriller mystery, I guess some horror elements again.
Cool.
About a murder on an asteroid mine and sort of the not terribly distant future in our solar system.
Plausible stuff here.
Yeah. And the real monsters are the corporate overlords all along. But,
the Weyland-Yutani.
It's about some people who are on this isolated, mine in the asteroid belt, basically trying to find a murderer that turns out to be much more complicated than expected. Yeah.
Whoa. So this kind of reminds me of The Thing, which is like one of my top 3 movies of all time.
Adore that.
Yes.
Yeah, no, like what I've always loved science fiction, and sci-fi horror is, I think it's fairly popular, especially in movies, but I think it's a little bit like doesn't always get the credit it deserves as being, one of the most exciting and creepiest genres to work in. So when I started writing adult sci-fi with horror elements, adult sci-fi horror, everyone's like, oh, what are your inspirations? What are you like? Well, I love The Thing. I love Alien and Aliens.
Yes.
And
awesome.
If you need to ask more than that, then it's like those things are great. And I feel like watching them, the the best thing that sci-fi horror does is that feeling that you get when you're watching those great, like classic sci-fi horror movies where it feels kind of like, familiar, and that these are people just doing their jobs, like, sort of doing their thing, and then stuff starts to go wrong, and then it goes more and more wrong, and that feeling of dread builds and builds and builds until it explodes, and in some cases literally explodes. And that feeling in that science fictional setting, which is usually a sort of strange, isolated setting, I love that.
Yeah.
Something that, where like help is not easy to come by, and having the dread build in that situation is just like, it's such a great way, I think, to explore both. The reason we love horror is the fear and the the choices that people are forced into, and also these like science fictional elements of what would you do if something happens that is not at all like within your expectations. And so that's those are my published books.
Congratulations on all of them.
Thank you.
So you've written some cross-genre stuff here, and when did you really decide you're wanting to write science fiction itself, like as a genre? When did you decide that?
I have always loved science fiction, and like I feel like I never really had a choice, because this is when I was young. Like, my father is a retired school teacher, and so we always had tons of books in the house, and he would read to us, and also he would not have a particularly strong sense of like age appropriate limitations. There were none. We had none, which is fine, I actually think that's completely fine. I think
so too.
Kids are capable of comprehending a lot of stuff that doesn't fall into age groups. But so among the books that my father would either give me and my siblings to read or read to us were things like Frank Herbert's Dune, or Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun, which is an insane bedtime story. Why were you doing that, Dad? But when you have that stuff from the beginning, it's like, oh yeah, no, this is just how stories are. And of course, like he read to us like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, and like all these things that are kind of foundational. And so it's been there all along. And I feel like there was never a point, like the first time I remember thinking, like, I've always loved writing stories since I was tiny little, probably like 7 or 8, but who knows? My childhood memories are vague and strange. But the first time I remember thinking I actually want to be a writer, like actually, want to do this as a thing that I do, not just occasionally, was when I was in high school, and I was reading Ray Bradbury. And so, and I think a lot of high school students who encounter Ray Bradbury have similar, kind of like, wow, that's so cool. And that's probably the right age to kind of discover it. But it was actually not one of the more science fictional. I was reading Something Wicked This Way Comes.
Oh yeah, which is terrifying,
It's terrifying and it's amazing. And it I just remember reading the very opening scene, which is, it's before Halloween, there's a thunderstorm coming in, and there's a lightning rod salesman coming into town. And it's just like, it's so full of like ominous hints about, you have no idea what the plot is going to be based on any of this. But the feeling of being in that scene and like something is changing in this little town, it's so powerful. And I just remember thinking like, wow, you can just do that with words. That's so cool.
The power behind that.
Right. And so that's, so I feel like the wanting to be a writer and wanting to write science fiction, and, other kinds of speculative fiction were always tied up together for me.
Yeah. It sounds practically genetic at this point.
Yeah. They were never, it was never like separate separate interests. It was always together. Yeah.
And I can appreciate that. That's how it's been for me too. It's like,
Yeah.
it's always
Yeah. And I
writing,
think
you know,
because I think it's like, because so many of the books that kids encounter or teens encounter, like so many teenagers, like their first like big book reading, something like Stephen King. So I think that's actually really natural for a lot of writers in science fiction, fantasy, horror, find themselves, you know, wanting, like, it was always telling stories and telling these kinds of science fictional fantastical stories was always tied up together, I think.
yeah, yeah. So, you know, we talked about Bradbury, but who else, and Aliens and the Thing. So who else have been like your go-to influences for science fiction and fantasy, if you want to talk about that too, because it's all kind of blended together a bit.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is kind of all blended together. And you know, I read a lot of, I will say I read, you know, did the thing where I went and read a whole bunch of classic science fiction and stuff, but it also not always my favorite. Like, you know, like various things, like I'm trying to think of, I'm terrible at thinking of names, but, you know, reading some of the old school things like Heinlein and Asimov and, you know, that kind of stuff. And it's fine, it's interesting, but honestly, a lot of times the characters aren't, like, it's one of those things where there's that classic writing workshop question where you look at something and it's like, are there actually any people in this story? And sometimes the answer is maybe not. But in terms of, I actually think I don't think this is a terribly controversial opinion, but I think science fiction has gotten way more interesting in the last 10, 15 years.
I agree.
As
You know, it's opened up
grown
and
bigger, more diverse,
bigger house, you know,
bigger house,
big tent,
starting to be able to read things from people all over the world.
Exactly.
Is amazing. So I will, like, it's a hard question for me to answer, because I'm trying to get back into, you know, discovering all of this stuff.
I
and
am
it's sort of
too.
it's not the easiest thing in the world, because there's so much, but it's
right.
You know,
good problems though. You know,
it's it's a good problem.
Yeah. I just feel like it's fantastic, and I want to see more. You know, even if I can't keep up with it, I still want to see more of it out there.
Right.
You know, it's just a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful time to be a writer, to be a science fiction writer, and with all the interconnectedness that we have,
yes,
that just makes it easier for people's voices to be heard who maybe haven't been heard before. You know, and just, you know, people who didn't grow up, say, you know, in 1980s America, like we did, you know, they're going to have a very different perspective. And I want to know what that is. I want to read that, you know, so it's all good. It's great.
Well, I think it's good, like, for the community and for the industry as a whole, but it's also, I think, good for individual writers to realize it's like you can't just be mediocre. You really have to push yourself. And I think that's really exciting, to be like, you can't just rely on the same old stories that's been, you know, told in the exact same way from the same perspectives for, 60 years, because why would you want to do that again when there's so many other options and so many other perspectives and so many other ways to tell stories out there that, I think it's way more exciting, and I think, pushes individual writers to create richer stories, and also pushes, the entire, the community's, output of stories to be so much richer.
Right. And then, given the fact that we are in such an escalated technological age where discovery happens constantly, where AIs are determining what's the best COVID treatment, things like that. Like, we're having to keep constantly educated, and the accelerated pace at all of this is fascinating. And, you worry sometimes, at least I do, it's like, oh, I'm going to write about this thing, and then next week I'm going to get in my inbox from
Right.
some biotech thing. Oh, it's, we did that. I'm like, great. But it's also
Right, yes.
awesome because we're having to push the boundaries, not just for our own writing, but also for science. Because
Yes.
we've always, science fiction and science, I think lately really rely on each other, don't you? And
I think, yeah, I do think there's a lot of interconnectedness there. And I think the third dimension is how like how that feeds into like how we even think about, like cultures and how,
right.
I like the conversation that so many people have been having over the last year. It's like, why do we do things the way we do when they can break so easily? And I think that's a question that science fiction has always asked and is great at asking. It's like, this is the way your society is. Now it's broken. What do you do? And I think the fact that science fictional like storytelling is so prevalent in our world and has been for a long time. Like it's like, all the big movies are science fictional.
Right.
So many of the big
we don't know
TV
a life
shows,
without it, right?
like
So,
nobody, even people who say they don't like science fiction are completely comfortable with the tropes and the trappings of it because it's everywhere. But I think that is something that when, like a journalist or someone can ask, like, what could society look like if it doesn't look like this one that, grinds to a halt because of a pandemic?
right.
And I think the fact that people, obviously not everyone, but a lot of people can say, yeah, we should think about that, is part of the fact because it's so ingrained in our experience as a story and fictional storytelling, our entertainment, even the entertainment we watch when we're just not trying not to think about things, is asking those kinds of questions. Like it's that those patterns are already in our brains and how we interact with the world. So I don't, who knows what will come of it. That's a separate question, what we can actually do. But I do think that like giving us space to ask those questions is something that, the prevalence of science fictional stories has really helped.
Yeah. I think it's almost at this point a superpower, which brings me to the science in your background. You have a PhD in geophysics. So like, how does your science kind of interplay with your science fiction? Do you have like, do you draw upon, do you find you draw upon it a lot?
I will say I do, but probably not at least so far, not in a super in-depth way. The science fiction, the novels that I've written, they tend to be, very fast paced. Like there's world building in there, but it's not like the detail's not really huge amount of detail in that. And they're also both very confined like locations. So it's not, like out there. I would love and will someday, but like more space opera stuff about like exploring galaxies and universes and all that stuff, because I love that stuff. But for now, what I feel like the most useful thing is that the science background gives me is that I know what questions I need to ask when I'm like, how does this, just as like the most simple, most straightforward example is, Dead Space takes place like on and sort of in underground and an asteroid that's not a particularly big asteroid. It's like, okay, what kind of gravity does that feel like? How does it change depending on whether they're on the surface or like in the mine inside? Because it does change when you're in that small of a, that small of a little planetary body. And just things like that, where I don't need to do calculations because, the numbers are not, it's all about what the character feels like. Nobody is, making charts of the gravitational anomalies, but just being like, okay, what does it feel like to walk in this environment? And I feel like that, knowing to ask that sort of question, then knowing sort of where to go to find answers for it. Because like, I'm not a planetary geologist. I don't have that answer off the top of my head. I can kind of figure out, things. I think that is like the biggest advantage to having a scientific background.
Yeah.
But a lot of things like there's also in Dead Space particularly, there's a big component about artificial intelligence. And I know fuck all about artificial intelligence. I have never done computer programming beyond the tiny bit that I needed to do to get through grad school. Like, it's not,
Right.
You asked me to explain how the computer works, and probably can't do a great job. So I had to sort of start from scratch there and basically just realize, I don't know this. I want to use it in this way in the story. So I need to sort of cast a wide net and read a bunch of stuff and sort of realize, and I think where the scientific background comes in helpful in a situation like that is realizing that in any science, people disagree. It's always changing. Mm-hmm. Predictions are usually, people predict things that, predictions, especially timescales of predictions in computing, it's ridiculous. There's no, you can't rely on it for anything. And that's fine. I think the people who work in the field know that, but it's, the reading between the lines of any, articles or posts or, forums is that there's a whole lot of unknowns and a whole lot of different approaches to looking at these things, such as how fast will artificial intelligences evolve? How will they evolve? How do we train them to do the right thing? How do we train them so they don't have our biases? We don't know how to do that. They all have our biases.
Yeah.
So I think knowing how science works is to get back to your question, having been there, knowing how it works, knowing that there are personalities, individual people involved whose perspectives, become prevalent or become ignored, helps just when you're looking at a field that you don't know anything about to sort of look at it and be like, okay, I can take the pieces I need and the pieces that I don't need, I can kind of hand wave away, because you don't always need everything. And just to sort of know that all sciences are constantly changing fields of study.
Right.
And our pool of knowledge is always growing, always.
Right.
It doesn't get
Constantly.
smaller.
No.
Yeah.
It just seems to get faster and faster.
Yes. And there's also, I think the other main thing that I think is helpful, because I studied the sciences and then sort of had a small hobby, never any academic or career work, just studying the history of science, something that is very interesting. And
it is.
It's fascinating. But knowing that people are always bad about predicting the future, they always have been. And that's just, I feel like there's something a little comforting about that.
You can forgive yourself for that.
Right. And that also helps, because when you're writing science fiction, not all science fiction, but a lot of science fiction is in some N plus some years in the future. And it's okay to not have to get every detail, because you can't. And
you can't.
You're never actually writing for the people who are going to be alive in 2067. You're writing for people now. So.
Right. And the way I kind of see it is, you take the science and that's the frame, and then the painting is the story inside of it. That's the fiction, and the framing can look like whatever it's going to look like, but the real meat of it is that fiction, that story, how it matters in the characters, no matter what species they are, what's happening to them and why should we care? And so, but having that frame is just pretty freaking cool, and it makes for an educational aspect to the writing, which I love personally. That's part of the reason.
And I think it, I like, what's happening to them and why should we care? That's what a story is.
Yeah.
And without the why should we care part, nothing else matters. It doesn't matter if you have the coolest science fictional idea in the world. If we don't care what's happening, no one's going to see your cool idea. So, it always comes back to that. And I think when you're pulling in, and I know you've written big science fiction stories too, so, you're pulling in things that you want to play. You're making a big playground with all your science fictional ideas.
Right.
But the things that get emphasized and get dealt with and delved into are the ones that affect the characters and what they're feeling, and the situations where they have to make difficult choices, where they are thrown into contact with people who they clash with, all these things that make stories, like all the delicious meat of the story.
Yeah. The discomfort, the cringe factor,
yes. People like, I always, like it's so basic in like storytelling, but I always go back to like, what do they want? What's stopping them from getting it? And what's going to happen if they don't get it or they do get it?
Right.
It's like, and once you have that sort of core drive, yeah, the frame, everything around it, you can go anywhere you want with it. And that's the fun of science fiction and fantasy, is that you can go anywhere, because the emotions, if the emotions are familiar, you can take readers anywhere.
Yep.
And they'll go with it. Yeah.
That's right. That makes a good story. So, I would like to talk a little bit more, if we could go back to Salvation Day, if you wouldn't mind showing us the cover for that again. I have a couple of choice questions for you.
Yes.
So, what's the latest news on Salvation Day? What's happening?
There's, it was optioned by Entertainment One for film.
Outstanding.
And they have a screenplay.
Ooh.
But there's been no news since that. And this, I think Hollywood works on its own time scales, where nothing happens and then everything happens. But it is still, still something that is in the works. But I don't have any updates on it.
Dead Space to me sounds pretty cinematic as well. So I'm hoping.
Here's
selfishly.
Link again. It's like, hey, attention. This is the fluffiest boy. Yeah, no, it's
goodness.
I would love for somebody to option Dead Space. I have good agents. They are working on it.
Cool.
But yeah, no, I mean, also there is no news on it, like legitimately no news on it, but when there is, it'll be like 7 months before I can say anything. But right now,
yeah,
no,
that's usually it works.
Yeah, no, it's just, and it's so like, because a lot of production companies don't want to announce things until they have names attached. It's just Hollywood works in like, it's
labyrinthine.
Publishing would be the worst industry if Hollywood didn't exist, which is the actual worst industry. And it's just, it's a mess. And honestly, I want like agents, lawyers to deal with that stuff. I don't want
deal with it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's because oh man, I don't want to have to deal with that.
So you would probably, would you be up for writing scripts, or are you just going to stick to books?
I'm not super interested in adapting my own books into scripts. It's like I already wrote them.
Please, someone else take the wheel.
Like I shift genres and like age groups and all that stuff so much because I'm always like chasing a new thing. But I actually have thought about writing, like original things in scripts for, I think the ideas that I've had would be mostly like television, or I've also thought about like podcast, audio formatting, but I haven't actually sat down to do any of it yet.
Yeah.
I love movies, but I don't think I'm a succinct enough storyteller to fit anything in a movie. I don't know. It just seems really hard to me.
Right. And I keep saying, like, I don't feel like you can ever, now there's rare exceptions. I don't feel like you can ever really get to what's really driving these characters in 2 hours. You can to an extent, but it's really hard to do. And like,
it's hard to do.
Yeah.
And like, again, I think sci-fi horror, for example, is something that works so well in movies.
It really does.
Because you can't, like horror, I think, and I think this is something that is people in the movie business and also moviegoers have known for a long time, is that horror, it probably works best in movies because it is, this concentrated emotion based on a scenario that's usually not super complicated. Like, sometimes it is, and then it gets a little weird, but once you get into stories that like bigger science fictional ideas or fantasy, I think you need longer, like obviously big sci-fi storytelling is a huge thing in television where, the Star Treks of every era. And
Right.
I love both the books and the TV show for The Expanse, fantastic
Yeah.
series, and I think it's a good thing now that this sort of a post Game of Thrones era, they're starting to do the same with fantasy, where
Yeah.
people are realizing that this is a medium where you can tell these big, complicated stories and people will go along with it.
Which is
So I think
great news
that's,
for those of us who write both.
yes, no, I think it's fantastic. And I'm glad that more and more like fantasy and science fiction projects are being picked up for television in particular, because I think there's
Yeah.
some room to breathe in there and to,
And more
again,
freedom
it's
than
that,
they've had historically in Hollywood too,
right, yeah.
Good.
And this big playground again that,
Yeah.
people like all kinds of different things. So, yeah.
Yeah, and we're at a really good time
So,
for that.
yeah, but yeah, no, I haven't written any scripts, but I am interested in it. It's just a matter of, I think I need to do some studying, to look at some, see how they're put together. I don't know. It's not like books where I've been reading them my whole life and I know how a book
Right.
is put together.
I know
It's
a very different.
it's a
kind of thing.
different thing, and I know people do it, and I know people do it brilliantly. So, yeah.
It would be
I mean, I
exciting
love to
see.
watch things, so it's not like there's
I know.
yeah.
So, you talk about sci-fi horror, and that's obviously one of your favorite subgenres of sci-fi. What are some of your other favorite subgenres, either for reading or writing or just general consumption?
I actually love like big space opera kind of stuff. Like it's like, it's great.
Fun. It's just
It's
fun.
fun.
Right.
It's big. Like I've always loved like Ian Banks's culture
Oh, yeah.
series, where these, casts of thousands and time scales of, generations and just big ideas. And that kind of stuff is just, I love that kind of stuff. I love I also really enjoy like kind of more like action kind of stuff. Like I love Martha Wells' Murderbot series.
Oh, yeah.
I adore those books because it's just so much fun, and it's like fun in kind of a heartwarming way, and I never get tired of it. And that kind of stuff, it's like, yes, I want to dive in and, just spend some time in that world. I think that's the things that I like most, are the ones that I can just sort of sink in and spend some time, which is, I think this is not that there aren't exceptions, but the ones that are a little closer to the real world are the ones that don't quite interest me as much, because it's not like what I really want when I'm jumping into a sci-fi book is to feel like I'm on a sci-fi adventure.
Your escape. It's escapism.
It's escape, but I think it's also like not escape in a bad way. It's just kind of like escape the same way, and like taking a trip to someplace new and exciting is.
Exactly.
Where it's,
you're traveling.
Yeah, traveling and seeing things that you hadn't seen before. And yeah, I love that kind of stuff. So yeah, anything space-based, however, some of it very, straightforward, some of it's super weird. Love, anything that takes me into space.
Yeah. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is.
So, what's your typical writing day like? Like, what's your process? Just you get up, you go write, or do you go for a walk or pet the cats?
I am, because have so far been lucky that I'm able to write full time.
Which is great.
I don't know if it'll last forever, but it's worked out so far. Mainly because I am just supporting myself. Like I understand that everybody's situation is different. Like I don't have kids, I don't have like sick family members to take care of. There's so many things that go into that, but So I'm able to take that ridiculous risk for myself. So I do write full time, which means I write like 20% of the time, because I prefer to work in the mornings. I like to sit down basically first thing and, try to get as much of the day's work as I can done, before lunch, which, like the days, like actual writing work, all the author things, promotion things, emails, that's also work, but it's a different kind of work. I like to do the writing stuff first thing before my brain gets cluttered and tired. And then I like to take a walk in the afternoon, which is especially lovely now that I can walk in beautiful green forests.
That's great.
Just, right away, and then sort of come back. I also like really practical, but because I have this schedule, I like to run all my errands like in the middle of weekdays rather than when everybody else is doing them. And then I come back and do all the other kind of things or finish the writing stuff. So I try to do, morning work, take some sort of outside break, finish up the last things. I try to, this is fairly recent, and only basically with the pandemic. I used to just kind of work every day until late, whenever I felt like, but when all of the external signifiers of time passing vanished because of the pandemic, and also because I was living in San Diego where there's no sense of time passing because every day is the seasons don't change really. It started to actually, I realized, once like isolation quarantine was going on and I was living with another writer and we were like, this is crazy. What are we doing? So I finally began to do like basically a 8 to 5. And after that, I stopped working and I take weekends off. And it's so much better for my mental health to actually be like, no, I don't have to work every day when I have the time. I can just not do a thing. And it took me until I was 42 years old to figure that out. So I would say, I hope most people figure it out sooner because I think it's not the lesson that our culture gives us. Our culture,
For sure.
American culture is cruel in telling people that they should be productive all the time. And I think it took until the pandemic for me to realize, that's actually, even for someone who loves what I do, and I do love what I do, I love writing, that's still not healthy.
Right.
So,
you can crash and burn real quick,
Yes, like hit a wall, like, coyote chasing Roadrunner into a fake train tunnel.
Totally.
And I think, so now I try to keep it, basically treat it just, it's the weekday job.
Yeah.
And that works for me. And it, I enjoy it that way because I can still take breaks from it, but it is the habit that I'm in. So
that's great. So do you have to have like coffee or particular spirits or particular
I drink coffee in the morning, just not as much as I used to. So yeah, I drink some coffee in the morning, but mostly I just kind of like sit down, sort of, do a little bit of just make sure the world didn't disappear overnight. Have to pet the cat for a while. There's actually 2 cats here, but one of them, she won't come out. She's asleep. This is her nap time.
Wow.
Pet the cat. And actually one of something that I started probably about a year ago, my friend and fellow writer, fantasy writer, Audrey Coulters, we text each other each morning our goals for the day.
Wow, that's cool.
Because having just, even if the goal is like, take a walk, make bread, don't murder anyone in a meeting, like it's just a way to sort of like force ourselves to organize our thoughts before we sit down to do things. So I'll just be like, okay, revise 2 chapters, reply to agent email, take a walk, blah, 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 things like that. And,
That's great.
and, it's just a real quick thing. There's nothing formal about it, but I think it does help me focus.
That's
So,
a really good idea. I like that a lot.
yeah. I'm also a big proponent of paper calendars. I don't use online.
Yes, me too.
Yeah, no,
I'm like
paper calendars.
Yeah.
And honestly,
paper to-do list. I don't know why, but the physical writing of it, it just sticks in my brain better.
Yeah, no, and I think that's, I know there's like neurological reasons why things that we write down, but also just having that and when you're writing, sometimes the goals, like the things that you write down seem kind of silly. So, it could be like 2,000 words or revise 2 chapters or outline or plan, but it still helps you be like, no, this is a task that I'm going to do.
And then you can check it off.
So much of writing is nebulous tasks that kind of all meld together. And sometimes you're just thinking about something and it's hard to be like, okay, I just need to figure this thing out. It's like, is that working just to stare out the window and think about a thing? Well, it is, but it's hard to sort of quantify that. So just being able to write down these little things and check them off, I think helps a lot. And
I do too.
For me, a daily word count goal is good when I'm drafting something new. I know some people who prefer like timed goals and that's what works for them. But I think the key is to find the thing that works for you.
Exactly.
And just make it a habit. And I think, I've been doing this for 6, 7, I don't know, some number of years now. And it's, it's basically a habit by now. And again, it's, no one else treats it as your job unless you treat it as your job.
Very true.
And that's irrelevant of whether or not you're getting paid for it.
Right.
Like when I'm working on short stories that might never sell, it's still a job.
Yep.
Or might only sell for like $200. It's still the work. So, yeah.
That sounds like really good writing advice. And so what's the worst writing advice you've ever received?
Oh, join Twitter. That was the worst advice I ever received.
Yeah, I could see that.
No, that's not really writing. That's more about publishing though. And I know some people love it, but it was terrible for me and I quit. But
it can be a real time suck.
And I think it's just, it depends on what you get out of it. Like everything else, that's, but writing, the worst writing advice. There's a lot of bad advice out there. I think I think this is not the most unique answer. I think a lot of people would agree with this, but I think I internalized very early in spite of loving weird science fiction since childhood, the write what you know, thing that people still sometimes say, although I think mostly the world has grown out of that a little bit. You don't see it too much anymore. But I think there's certain, I think mostly around college age. I took some creative writing class, but I never really studied literature or creative writing. But this idea that, in order to create something that will be impactful, you have to rely heavily on the bleak realism, and there's that. And I think this is pretty much out of style by now. Maybe there's still some people who think this, but this is not super common anymore. But when I was growing up and first starting, it was that feeling. It's oh, I have to be profound and I have to be, serious and I have to write about serious things. And then that's pretty I feel like that's really restrictive to because any advice that tells you have to write this way about these things, I think is probably bad writing advice. And it comes in lots of different forms. But for me, it was, that particular form. And getting over that, you realize it's no, you can write about anything you want in any way you want, and you will still produce serious, profound, impactful things.
That's right.
Like that stuff happens because you care about the stories you're telling, not because you are focusing on things that, you know, the particular era that you live in have decided are the things that matter.
Right.
And or the, you know, like, or what people who, you know, like a small number of people have decided is like canonical, important literary topics, you know, because again, this is all about, you know, your perspective and what people think about stories and what they're experiencing in stories. So you never know how your stuff, anything you write is going to impact people.
Right.
And I think you can't, you know, the idea that you have to choose that impact before you start writing is a terrible one. Like you tell the story to the best of your ability. And yes, you want a story to, every writer goes in thinking you want your story to make people feel a certain way. You know, if we didn't want to make people feel things, we wouldn't be doing this. And, you know, but you can't ever really predict how things are going to impact people, how things are going to change people. So, you know, you shouldn't try to focus only on very small, you know, small ideas of what people think that impact is. I've just used the word impact like 30 times, which is more than I ever have in my life. So
Your next novel, Impact.
Which would not be a serious literary contemporary work. It would be about things in space crashing.
Yeah, which is fun to write about, you know.
Right. And like, I think I've been thinking about this because, you know, I love all my books. I'm proud of them. I was not like, I feel like I've gotten more reader email about Dead Space than I have about any of the others, which
really
just, yeah, it surprised me. I think just because it's like sci-fi mystery is not really the thing that you expect to like really kind of get under people's skin, but I've gotten really nice messages from people who are like, oh my God, this is so exciting. I love it, blah, 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 all this stuff. And I think like there's no reason why I would expect one way or the other. It just, I think maybe it surprised me that that was the thing that people found at the right time in this stupid time that we live in. And I never would have expected that when I was writing it, revising it, because I wasn't thinking about that. And, you know, I think you can't predict those kinds of things. And I think that's part of why writing can be frustrating, because sometimes something like drops and it's like a tree falling in a forest and doesn't make any sound. And sometimes things really catch people's interest. So
the right time for you.
And that's not
right
really in our control. I think that's,
but it's great that this is capturing people, because I feel like it was hard for me to read during all of this. Like I'm still reading
book I
was reading like a
so
year
hard.
ago. But
I've read all like, yeah, no, I agree completely. It's been so hard to read.
But you got people's attention with this. So congratulations. That's wonderful.
Thank you. No, it's I've talked to a lot of writers. I don't know why it's been so hard to read, but it has been.
Mm-hmm. It's weird. It's the weirdest thing, almost the weirdest thing out of all of it. It's like, why can't I just pick this up and read it? What's wrong with me?
Because I want to. There's things
I think about this other crap, you know,
that I'm super excited about. When I think about them, like, oh yeah, I want to read that. I love that. And then I'm just like,
the TBR is like,
yeah,
I'm buy the books, but when am I going to read them? I don't know. I'm still going to buy them.
Yeah, though. I mean, I bet you like the simplest is just another manifestation of this like whole soul fatigue that we're all feeling, where it's, you know, like reading is for, you know, in a good way, an emotional experience, but maybe we don't want any more emotional experiences right now. Like, I don't know what it is. I just know that it's not uncommon. And I am glad that there are still people out there reading, and I am hoping that like I've started reading, like I started with rereading some old favorites and stuff. Like
Yeah.
I mentioned the Murder Bot books, which are not old, they're new, but I reread the entire series, and that was just to sit down every evening and just read for a couple hours.
Yeah.
Felt great. So I'm hoping that I can, get back into it, because yeah, the list of things to read from is, yeah, it's huge.
Again, good problems, but at the same
No
time,
problems,
I
yes.
just feel like the gear is shifting, like we're starting to creak forward. And I think
Yeah.
maybe it'll just suddenly be like a dam breaking and we'll be like, we're ready to go.
Yeah.
I
No,
hope
I
so.
think I hope so, because I think it's been a terrible
It's been awful. We've
I don't even
lost
know
too
what,
much.
18 months, however long, it's been awful. And everybody's tired of feeling awful.
And we're tired of the same old stuff. Like we need new things. We need a new environment, whether exterior or interior, to get away to. And
right. Yeah.
books are perfect for that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, I think our brains definitely need new food.
yeah.
So
I have one more silly question for you, and then
sure.
I'll toss something back to you. So like, the Voight-Kampff test in Blade Runner, where you're whether or not you're a replicant, right? So
yes.
what would tip people off to your being human or not? So let's start with human. How would people know you're human?
Oh man. I think the way they would let's see, a specific question is hard to figure out, but I feel like the most human of my human traits is just constant anxiety.
Word.
like I feel like at some point the robot overlords are just going to be like, why are humans like that? So any question that would assess that, it would, it'd be like, so you walk into a room where there are people you don't know, what do you do? And the answer is like, turn around and run away like you're human. And I think, I think that would be a dead giveaway. I'd get like halfway through one question and they'd be like, she's fine. She's not a replicant.
I'm fine, because I'm the same way. I'm super anxious, just baseline.
Oh yeah,
like,
yeah.
Any android would be like, I can't deal with you.
Yes.
Okay, so what would tip you off to be you're not being human? Like,
okay.
Ooh, a reverse situation.
Yeah. Oh, that one's a little harder, I think. And I guess that's the whole point of the original story.
Right.
I don't know. What would, because I feel like humans are so varied that it's yeah, I actually don't know how to answer that. I'm not sure.
Okay, so what would be something, let's just frame this, like when I was growing up, I felt like I didn't belong anywhere, right? I was like, I'm the alien, right?
Right.
So like, what's something that is so idiosyncratic about you that you might be an android? Like maybe it's something that, you'll be like, are you really human?
No, that's a different way of framing it for sure. I mean, I think I have a lot of weird habits. But again, people do. That's what people are. They're just collections of weird habits and nonsensical emotions.
They're a concatenation of weirdness.
Yeah. No, I'm now completely blanking. Although I'm sure if you asked anybody that has like lived with me or knows me, would be like.
We'll have to come back to that someday then.
Yeah, no, I can't really think of anything off the top of my head. I should have. Oh man, yeah, I don't know. What would your example be?
Oh,
you have one?
Well, it sort of feeds back into the anxiety, actually. Like the point where like I could be a robot simply because of, well, my obsession with paper lists and to-do lists is like,
Yeah,
that just seems kind of weird, like, why do I have to
yeah,
write this list, And I just, like, some people just, they know what to do, but here I am writing these lists, and sometimes I make them, kind of artistic or whatever, which is almost like a
right.
machine situation where you're making something else that has nothing to really do with what you're supposed to be doing, which I
Yeah.
don't know. It's
Actually,
like
I feel like
programmed.
I do because I actually, on my daily list, I have things that I do every day and they're still written on the list, like take your meds, clean the cat box,
That's your programming coming out.
yeah, yeah. And it's like a list of like, take a walk. How far did you walk? I record
Yeah.
how far I walked each day. So I think that is slightly robotic. But the other thing that I thought of, and which I've only thought of because it's the first time in a very long time that I've lived by myself. But when I am by myself, living by myself and basically in complete control of my environment, my least human trait is that I always know where everything is.
Oh
Like
God,
in
that
the
must be so
kitchen,
nice.
I like and I think, I mean, there's like the junk hard drive of the closet where certain things are, but like if I'm in my kitchen, I know where everything is. And I think I didn't, because for so long I was living with other people, like either in somebody else's house or sharing a space where you just don't have that control. I didn't realize that for me, like storing everything in a certain place is what's natural.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think in some ways I'm slightly programmed like that.
All right. Well,
But I think, yeah.
that's a good one to have.
Yeah. I mean, it's useful, but also
It is.
when, like any programming, like when it breaks down, I'm just like, where
You're
I
bored.
can't find anything. What am I doing?
Well, that's great. So like, we're about to wrap up here, but is there anything that I haven't asked that you want to talk about or?
Oh gosh. I don't know. Let's see, I'm working on my
What's
next
coming?
novel.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
so
I'm working
tell us
on
about
my
that.
next book, which is actually, it's back. I'm doing another middle grade fantasy right now.
Oh, yay.
Which is, it's been a lot of fun. It's in, sort of in revisions. And
Great.
it is in revisions. I don't know why I said sort of. It is actually in revisions right now. So hopefully that'll be out sometime next year, I think.
Oh, good.
Spring 2022. I don't have an
Yeah.
exact date yet. It's called Hunters of the Lost City. It'll be
Ooh, I love it.
from Quirk Books, which is a great, like smallish indie press in Philadelphia. And I'm having a lot of fun with it. Again, it's there's something about both writing middle grade, which again is for the sort of tween
Yeah.
like age, because I think that's the age, when the world gets really big.
Yeah.
When
Carrier.
you start to realize that adults don't know everything and that the world is flawed, the world is unfair, but also that you have power to change it. And so that age is so fun to write. And when I've done events, they're the most fun kids to talk to, just, so
That would
great.
be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, you have a 12-year-old, like, right?
Yeah, and a 14-year-old, and there's
Yeah,
a
and a
definite
14
difference between
Yeah,
the two
yeah.
at this point.
And
yeah.
so it's just really fun. And again, just writing like pure fantasy adventure is I think there's some like there's an element of just play involved, even when it's like a serious story or has dark elements that just I feel like is very indulgent, but in a good way. It's like just let the fun imagination stuff run wild. So that's what I'm working on now. I have no idea what's coming after that. I guess that's a decision I'm going to need to make real soon.
All right.
But yeah, that's next.
Well, Callie, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much. It's good to talk to you.
You too. And I wish you the very best in beautiful Portland, Oregon. And, say hi to Powell's Books for me and have that wonderful coffee. And I know there's good pie. Hopefully there's still random order pie was really good.
Oh, look.
Yeah. So
all right.
thank you
Well, it's
so
great
much.
talking to you.
You too. And Ad Astra.
Bye.
Bye.